a high school debater, I spent a lot of my time talking about the inevitable nature of nuclear detonation. My junior year of high school, I was selected to compete in a semifinal round of the International Public Policy Forum in New York City. The topic of the debate was, as a last resort, unilateral military force is justified to minimize nuclear weapons proliferation. That is me in the middle, wearing a lapel pin of Fat Man, the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. We had all visited the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History and picked up those pins in preparation for the trip. It wasn't until I studied abroad in Ghana almost a year later that I really started to think about how my educational experiences had informed my nuclear worldview. While I was in Ghana, I worked at a primary school. One morning, the teacher I worked under asked me to grade a specific part of the students' English textbooks. It was a sentence ordering exercise about the different steps on boarding a train. The teacher had never ridden a train before and didn't know what the correct order of the sentences was, and because of that, I was left to grade the workbook. While I was grading the workbooks, I couldn't help but think how baffling it was that the educational materials at this school were so irrelevant to the lived experiences of the students that went there. Their narrative was ignored. I started questioning the ways in which we learn about nuclear history and how the framing of this industry has impacted the perspective New Mexicans have on its existence in our state. How are we learning about nuclear history in school? To begin my investigation, I headed to the place where the atomic industry had made one of its first marks on our state, the Trinity site. And I asked people what they remembered learning about the Trinity test in school.
I feel like I learned something about it, but I couldn't tell you.
I think I learned that it was the site of the original atomic explosion
Yeah.
for the Manhattan Project.
Can you repeat what you said earlier?
Yeah, I didn't even hear about it until you guys told me.
Really?
Yeah.
When I don't know how did I learn of this? It was later in life.
Yeah.
And
I think from our kids.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, from our kids.
From your
Yeah.
kids.
Otherwise, it was something that was never taught in school.
While going to Trinity gave me a glimpse of what I was looking for, I was eager to hear more about how my peers that went to high school in New Mexico had learned about the nuclear weapons industry and how they perceived that experience.
So I am from Edgewood, New Mexico, and I went to high school in both Moriarty High School and Moreno Valley High School.
I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I went to high school at the Albuquerque Institute for Mathematics and Science.
I'm originally from Mexico. I lived in Albuquerque since 2009, and I went to El Dorado High School.
I'm born and raised in Albuquerque, and I went to St. Pius High School.
So I was raised for the better part of my life in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is in southern New Mexico, about 3 hours away from Albuquerque.
Nothing.
Honestly, I don't remember learning anything.
Not very much of it. I think the only thing I really remember is learning about the nuclear bomb in history class, but that was junior years. That was a long time ago.
I'm pretty sure I'm the wrong person to interview for this.
No, I want whatever your authentic answer
Are you
is.
sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't learn much about nuclear, the nuclear industry, through my classes in school. It wasn't really part of the narrative. It really wasn't part of the educational curriculum that was presented. I think I remember in my New Mexico history class, I think we talked a little bit about the Manhattan Project and how New Mexico was directly involved in that, and it was definitely framed as kind of we played this really important role in ending the Second World War, and that was the narrative that was presented, but.
Mostly the raw history behind it, at least in the context of history, just why we had to make the bomb, and it was to prevent the loss of several millions more lives. And in the context of science, we learned that how much of a achievement it was to actually construct the bomb, and how it was this kind of pinnacle of mankind.
like a majority of my New Mexico history class was like centered around World War II. But what's weird about our New Mexico history class is there's only a semester.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's how everybody else's was, but ours was only 16 weeks, and then that was it. So like a lot of it, like I said, was mainly like a little bit before like the Conquistador era, and then World War II, and then like I think probably like a week of like current day.
We didn't learn much about the arms race or nuclear weapons in general that I can remember. I do remember we had a project where I chose to go to the Nuclear Science Museum, and that's where, like, inside of that class and outside of that class, I learned the most about nuclear history.
Definitely, it was like a story based on the perspective of us and how we, you know, U.S. in the context of the world and how we came along and saved everyone. Not only that, but we were, you know, we weren't asked to question what we did was right or wrong. We were just told that we had to do it. We weren't asked if it was, you know, it was like, we weren't asked to inquire about, like, would have really a million more people died during the war if we didn't drop the bomb, or would have the Japanese surrender sooner?
Well, this is interesting because I read this and I see, okay, well, this content standard of in order to understand the complexity of the human experience, and I see several narratives on this sheet that we're definitely taught as very incomplete and weren't the full picture growing up in the schools.
Everyone else, I suppose. They were necessarily left out, but their roles were minimized or maybe not even emphasized at all.
Natives of New Mexico, minority groups, who is being inflicted on by this type of energy, what is actually being... I don't think we ever talked about waste either. We never talked about anything that involved the after aspects of what we used it for, only what was like current and what needed to be done to do it, but never what happened to it afterwards.
Definitely people who didn't participate in that. Like, I can only imagine, like, people in Los Alamos who weren't, like, in the bomb efforts, or people who were there beforehand, and then, like, the bomb, like, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of the untold stories, I feel like no one really questions it, or narrates it, or cares to, because it's just, like, bomb, and that's our big contribution.
It's kind of like what we kind of perceive as being reality, it was actually reality, right? So, for example, right? Yeah, sure, on a surface level, like these high-tech industries and the role of science in New Mexico is ostensibly a good thing, right? Builds jobs, builds the economy, but really, it's also in essence create kind of a colony of sorts of Hispanic people that surround the Santa Fe and Los Alamos areas, right? And so that is something they don't teach you in the classroom. That is a narrative that we kind of ignore here in the state of New Mexico. And so, if we're talking about the complexity of the human experience, how can you not acknowledge these and still, I guess, essentially say that we're understanding the complexity?
What does it mean when those that grew up in the place where the nuclear weapons industry was born feel as though their educational understandings of this industry are fragmented? How do we make sense of our educational experiences as New Mexicans when our narratives are not represented? Cognitive justice is recognizing the diversity of knowledge, understanding, and of narratives. It is the presence of equality for all knowers. When will New Mexico see cognitive justice in the nuclear story? In a very ironic turn of events, while I've been waiting to get into Trinity, the Ring of Fire started playing on the radio.
I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire. I fell in